We have a killer show today. We're here with Jacob Burdis. He is a co-founder of Emersion AI. He's a really savvy product guy. And this product is one of the best AI products because it's going to disrupt call centers all around the world. Jacob, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you with Emersion AI.
Yeah, thank you. So just my background, I've always been super interested in language and technology and how they fuse together. So I studied linguistics and Russian in college and then eventually got into educational technology for my PhD. All the while I was working for a language training institution that trained in over 60 languages in these 9-week intensive courses. And so I was over curriculum and technology for that group. And it always came up. We had such high scale. How do we use technology to accomplish our most important learning outcomes faster? How do we get the data we need to improve our curriculum even better? And so that's a lot of where my mindset was. And then just saying how I got to Emersion AI, I was recruited to Pluralsight. I was a product manager at Pluralsight, which is another ed tech company. Just at a time that they acquired an assessment company called Smarterer. And their strategy was to say, how can we take really smart assessments combined with our modular content and create customized learning paths for our learners? And that gave me a huge light bulb saying, you know what, the language learning industry does not have anything like this. And one of the biggest deficiencies was language assessment. How can we, specifically for speaking is really hard to assess, create a digital solution that can democratize speaking assessment so that it can be used to create these better customized personalized learning paths. And that's really what launched it. All the while my co-founder, he had a call center in the Philippines, and he started a bunch of businesses, and he, next to his call center, there was a company that had a bunch of Filipinos teaching Koreans on the phone how to speak English. And he says, there's got to be a better way. And he had all as well as hiring people, making sure they spoke well enough. And so we came together and were able to find that a lot of what I studied in my PhD dissertation in terms of how to automate speaking assessment could fill a really important gap, specifically for international companies as they're looking to hire language speakers.
That is so awesome. Thank you for that introduction, Jay. So your primary customers that I understand are call centers around the world, also got some universities, and essentially what I'm describing here is in this narrative, the Koreans teaching the Filipinos how to speak English over the phone. You've got a scenario where you have people evaluating other people's English skills, and they may not even speak English that well themselves.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you're hiring internationally someone who needs to speak English to fulfill a Nike contract for their customer support. And if you don't have a solid way of assessing their English, you're either going to get poor customer satisfaction scores, or they're going to churn out real quick, which is really expensive to get another person back in their place. And so it's a really big problem specifically for call centers, but really any international organization that needs to hire. And you mentioned education. We also work with several hundred US universities to place speakers into the right foreign language course with our assessment. So incoming freshmen, if they've already learned Spanish, they can skip to Spanish 202 or whatever.
That's fantastic. And in the global economy, I just see a huge opportunity here. So kind of putting on my product manager's hat, this problem that you've described, this is a real good customer problem. And if we can solve this problem with AI, X is just going to be a killer. So how about we jump into the demo here now that we've kind of digested the problem and the massive opportunity, see what this product actually looks like, how it works.
All right, let's do it. So I'll show you, first of all, this is what it looks like for a test taker. When they come in, they're assigned an assessment. I've got a few different assessments assigned, but we'll jump right in to take the English speaking test, which is our flagship, our adaptive, AI-driven predictive language proficiency test. So you hop in, we can skip through this. It just says some of the things you need to be successful in the test. We do collect some background data that we give back to the administrators of the company, all in an effort as we're trying to help them be more efficient with their candidate screening and recruiting process. So some of these questions in aggregate, we're learning how to better predict which candidates might perform better in the test and make their process more efficient. We'll go ahead and skip that. I'm going to begin the microphone check. So this is just making sure the system works, but it also is an example of how the assessment works. So why don't you go ahead and try, Jacob, as I go through this.
Okay.
Joe writes poetry.
Joe writes poetry.
He writes letters.
He writes letters.
I can speak English.
I can speak English.
All right, so just make sure that audio is working correctly.
Joe writes poetry.
We do a back-end check, but we also make the user check just to make sure.
He writes letters.
A little funky, but it's good enough.
I can speak English.
All right.
And you know what, Jacob, I just want to comment. I love that you're not skipping over this part of the demo at all, because we all know that data quality is so important for the success of an AI product. Like if you just try to, especially if AI is a core part of your product offering, so some stats that I've seen out, one of the number one reason that AI startups fail is because of the failure to acquire the necessary quality to power their AI products. So that mic check, absolutely necessary for this product. Let's move on.
Awesome. Okay. So why don't you go ahead? You're going to quickly find as you perform, it's going to adjust the level of difficulty as you go. So why don't you go ahead and give it a try?
Okay.
The meal is lovely.
The meal is lovely. So now it should be getting harder now that it's processing that.
That's right. And I'll tell you a little bit about how the backend works after you do a few.
Okay.
It makes me happy that you like to snorkel.
It makes me like to snorkel.
Looks like the audio wasn't great, so it might kick you back down a little bit.
Half of the teams are sending boys to practice at the field.
You did okay.
Half of the boys are sending, half of the teams are sending boys to, I forgot what it said.
The city is developing a central plan.
The city is developing a central plan.
They are debating the unfair proposition.
They are debating the unfair proposition.
All right, so maybe we can pause here for a minute, and I can just tell you what's happening. So we have a huge item bank, and that item bank, it's tied to all of the data of all the assessments that we've ever given. And so the items themselves are categorized and ranked in terms of difficulty, and they're meant to kind of elicit a certain level across the language proficiency spectrum. And so when you're answering, it's starting with a random one because it doesn't really know anything about you. And based on how you answer, we're using an algorithm. It's called the maximum Fisher algorithm that's determining which item is going to be the most informative for you based on how you've answered and based on how everyone else has ever answered this item. And as you answer more and more items, it gets a lot smarter in terms of saying, well, this is the next item. And so just a quick window into how assessment works. You always want an item that's about the 50% probability of whether you're going to get it right or wrong. That gives you the most information from a test administration perspective. If they were all really easy and you're getting them all right, we're not really learning anything. We just know you're not beginner. Same thing if they're all really hard and you're getting them all wrong, we just know you're not advanced. But if we can hit right that sweet spot, so that's what it's aiming to do each time. And every time you answer, especially if you answer consistently, then it's telling us how confident are we now in our prediction. So we're predicting each time this is what your ability is. And then once that standard error, or another way to think of it, the confidence gets high enough or the standard error gets low enough, then we're able to say we're solid. This is our estimate and prediction of how well you speak the language.
That is so awesome. And to me, so fascinating, Jacob, how these recordings here, this is using language processing combined with this Fisher calculations. And this is highly predictive of somebody's language speaking abilities. And of course, being able to repeat phrases is one component of someone's language learning skills. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you are going to be evaluate sort of your roadmap on terms of incorporating more evaluations into the product?
Yeah, totally. So I showed you part one. There's a part two as well that has open responses here. So that in that section, we actually do solicit spontaneous speech. We've been doing that since the company started. And admittedly, when we first started the company, we based all of our score on the first part one. But as we've been collecting the data and as we've been calibrating these data across all of our test takers, we've been able to start identifying which pieces of the speech recognition results for the spontaneous speech can inform toward overall language ability, but also inform some of the specific subcomponents of language ability, speaking ability specifically, like pronunciation or listening comprehension, but also fluency, grammar, command, vocabulary use. So it's pretty exciting. We're always growing in terms of how we're leveraging these points of our data to inform the overall score. But to your other question, so we have other assessments as well that test reading and grammar and listening comprehension. We're building a writing assessment so that we can get a much larger picture of someone's ability. Because at the end of the day, our job to be done, the job of our customer is they don't care about assessments. They don't want to administer an assessment. They want to make a decision. And they need to make sure that they're making as informed of a decision as possible. And so our job is to deliver them the overall data they need to make that decision. And so we're trying to work and have enough modules and enough clarity as we elicit these data from the test taker so that we can be confident in the data we give them so they can make the best decision possible, whether it's for hiring or whether it's for educational placement.
That's fantastic. This is done in an automated way. This really allows them to evaluate much more candidates. If they were just trying to do this on their own, number one, the quality would not be as good. And number two, they're just, you only have time to evaluate 4 or 5 people just manually. This really can give people who otherwise have a shot at these jobs a chance to demonstrate their skills. So I see this product as not just really cool from an AI perspective, but one that absolutely humanitarian cause at helping people to emerge and progress in their careers and have an opportunity to get out or whatever that is.
So I want to speak to that really quick, and it kind of moves into a next topic I think we want to talk about, is 90% of our competition right now is non-consumption. And what that means for us is they don't have a formal way to measure language ability. And so they're relying on whichever recruiter interacted and interfaced with the applicant. And that is so subject to bias. There's all sorts of bias, sometimes unethical in terms of the applicant that comes in. And so implementing a more objective measure of language ability is a step, like you said, toward giving everyone a fair shot. And that leads into one of the most important lessons that I think that we've learned in terms of using AI as a product or a way to solve this problem, is that we have to make sure that all of the data that we're collecting is avoiding bias, systemic bias. A lot of times, if we're only pooling data to inform our algorithm from a certain socioeconomic status or from a certain L1 background, then we're really doing a disservice, and it could be potentially unfair and biased toward another group. And so one thing we always have to be conscious of is making sure that our data is as bias-free and as diverse as possible, and it actually represents the very many use cases that people are going to be using this to make a decision. So that's always something that is on the back of our mind, and in order for it to be, like you said, an ethical product, that's something that needs to be top of mind.
Fantastic. that data diversity is definitely crucial when it comes to having the highest predictive power. If you have a really good algorithm, a really good stats model, if you're only getting a narrow sample, the results will suffer. So here for our last question, wrapping up here, if you, Jacob, were hiring an AI product manager, what is the number one skill that you would look for in an AI PM to help bring Emersion AI to the next level?
That's a good question. I think the number one that I would choose is their ability to strategically look at, tons of different sources of data and be able to find the ones that are crucial and important enough to tell the story and to answer the question that they're trying to go towards. So a lot of times we'll give a project where we'll have a data set, and we'll look for the applicant to look through the data set and tell a story with it. And we're particularly looking for if their biases or their assumptions are driving their interpretation of the data, or whether they're able to ask why a ton of times and really get at what the data is telling, fighting their own, subjective bias at what they might think, and letting the data, the story from the data really emerge. And so that has to happen in my opinion, before any sort of algorithm, is ever even implemented, knowing which data to feed in, because crappy data will result in crappy solutions. So that's where I think the main problem starts.
Absolutely. And I think it's sometimes easy to lose that. It's easy to just say, okay, I have a bunch of data. Now let's just try to predict it like crazy, predict our outputs like crazy. Taking a moment before you exit and productize your AI, taking time to analytically dissect and discover the patterns can help you get key insights on who your customers are. What are the behaviors that, because especially for immersion, if you find out that certain sequences of speech are highly predictive, or certain, then you can in on that. If you just create a predictive margin, it's just going to use whatever data is there. If creating a predictive algorithm, you find that pattern, then you can give them more assessments. And I think that this principle does relate to Emersion AI. It's really for any human-centered AI product needs to understand the humans behind data. Well, thank you, Jacob. Thank you for your time. Thank you for demoing this product. We're looking forward to Emersion AI disrupting world collaboration and helping people to have a shot at their dreams. This is really incredible, and thank you so much.
All right, pleasure's all mine. Thanks.